The two-day Plastic Colloquium has been wrapping up in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg today. The event brought together key stakeholders to deal with the policy direction for plastic waste management. The aim of the event is to emphasize the international best practice to tackle plastic waste. Our reporter Nompumelelo Siziba has been there.
Thanks very much. We are now in the closing stages of the Plastic Colloquium, which started yesterday. Yesterday, of course, there was a lot of focus on the exhibitors here who were showing how they're reusing and recycling material to better improve the prospects of the environment. And of course, as we head towards the end of the sessions here today, where the people have been talking amongst themselves, the private sector, public sector, and people from the informal sector, as well as NGOs. As we come to a close, it only makes sense to get some commentary from the Minister of Environmental Affairs, Forestry and Fisheries, who actually spearheaded this whole meeting, Madam Barbara Creasy. And so now she joins me in our mini studio. Thank you very much, Minister, for joining us. Are you happy with the level of engagement that's taken place and with the progress so far?
Greetings to you and of course to all the viewers at home. Yes, I think the last 2 days have been great. We've had over 300 delegates here representing all levels of government, the plastics industry, the Consumer Goods Council, micro enterprises, the informal waste pickers, and of course many civil society organizations. What I'm hoping, because we're about to go to the closing session, is that we are, from the commissions that we've just had, we're going to come up with what I call the master plan. And that's really going to take us forward to look at how are we going to reduce the 50% of plastic that is not currently being recycled and is going into landfills and into our environment. We've had good discussions here. We've talked about the circular economy. We've talked about how do you design products for recycling and reuse. We've talked about what is the role of informal waste pickers and how do we register, organize and protect this very vulnerable sector of workers. We've talked about the role of the consumer and the role of people like you and I at home. What can we do to reduce waste? What can we do in terms of our consumer choice to make sure that we reduce single-use plastics in our environment? But how can we help the recycling effort through doing simple things like rinsing out plastic containers before we put them into the waste sorting bin? So I think it's been an exciting day, and I hope by Monday we're going to have something practical that we can implement.
Now, Minister, you've already told us that there are policy interventions in place to try and deal with plastic waste, but you just feel that they just haven't been satisfactory in terms of their impact. So once you collate all the views and you guys come to this master plan, what does it then mean for legislation going forward?
Well, I think first of all what we're trying to change is practice. So we need a master plan that, as I say, is based on the household and on the consumer, and we need change in consumer behavior. We obviously then need to look at the role of municipalities. We still have 35% of households in our country that don't receive weekly refuse collection. Of course, as provincial and national government, we're working hard on how we support municipalities to expand the reach of household collection. But in the meantime, what is the practical solution? And I think we've heard interesting ideas here to set up buyback centers, to set up recovery centers. We've got mobile units that are going out into communities collecting plastics. These are some of the solutions we need. But once you've collected it, what are you going to do with it? And I think that's where the whole question of the initial product design becomes important. I learned here that if you produce clear plastic bottles, you've got a much better chance of recycling them than if they're colored. We want to encourage consumers and the retail sector to label the bottles for branding purposes rather than coloring them. We've had interesting discussions with those who are producing different kinds of products out of recycled plastic. So interesting discussions about new forms of building material, new types of tiles, what do you call this?
Clothes? Attire?
Clothes, yes. I was looking for a word like fabric,
okay.
that you can make out of plastic bottles. So one of the things that's very important is how do we certificate these new kinds of commodities. The South African Bureau of Standards have been really engaged here to come up with that question. Of course, in the end, you've also got to look at new regulations. So our regulatory and standards group is addressing the question of would we need new regulations so that we design for recycling? Do we need this whole area of biodegradable plastics? It's something new in the South African market. We need to do our research. We need to understand what would be the applicable standards. We need to understand what would be the applicable regulatory environment. So yes, I think that we are expecting there will be regulatory enhancements. And the key thing that we're trying to do here is that we're trying to move together as government, as industry, as those who are consumers, so that, as they say in the African proverb, we can go further.
One last thing, Minister, just in terms of everything that you've just outlined about some of the ideas that have come out, it does sound like we could be getting quite a positive economic spin-off as a result of boosting the recycling sector.
Absolutely. There's an interesting statistic, and that statistic is every ton of waste that goes into a landfill creates 1 job. Every ton of waste that is recycled creates 18 jobs. So waste is potentially big business. It's potentially a big job spinner. I think this is why the President launched the Waste Pakisa earlier this year, because we want to look at a range of different waste streams and say, how do we enhance the circular economy in those waste streams, and how do we use that to create jobs?
Minister, pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. That was the Minister of Environmental, Fisheries and Forestry Affairs. She was just giving us a recap on what's been covered here at the Plastic Colloquium. And of course, she's about to go off into the closing session where they're hoping to pan out a master plan which will help to inform how we better manage waste going forward.